Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Tuesday Live with Joe and Jen. And today we are pleased to present with you guys Bob Bluhm, who is an amazing attorney out of Dallas, Texas. And Bob really specializes in one of the things that caught my eye a long time ago, asset protection. And Bob, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself because you're going to do it a million times better than me. But I've been following Bob for years, and the wisdom that he has. We're super honored to have you here today, Bob. So thank you for joining us live.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet, Joe. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I've been an attorney for a lot of years and started out as a trial lawyer, suing people and defending people in court. And then one particular case that we won, but we shouldn't have won because the client was wrong, really bothered me. And so I switched sides a long time ago to become an asset protection attorney. Instead of someone who goes after people, now I protect people from lawyers like I used to be. So it's great being able to help people and help them feel more secure and have greater peace of mind.
Well, and obviously you were on one side of it, so you know what to look for, right? But you also do estate planning too, which is part of the reason why we want to have you on today, because a lot of our followers, maybe have a family now, right? You maybe got young kids, and that's something to think. It keeps myself and Jen up, thinking about, if something were to happen to us, you want to have the right checks and balances in place today. So we really want to go over a lot about that. So you're based out of Dallas, Texas. You help, is it just Texas, or are you outside of that area where you help people?
We help people all over the country and from other countries as well. So we have a lot of international clients too, who invest in U.S. real estate.
Okay. So if you're listening and somebody's thinking to yourself, maybe I'm just starting off with real estate and you want to start building your empire the right way, or you already have a bunch of deals, we really want to dive into asset protection. Because one of the things I learned from Ron LeGrand was not just how important it is to build your empire, but to protect it and how important that is. So can you dive into a little bit about, what is asset protection? Some of the things that possibilities of things that could happen.
And when should you start? Do you have to wait till you have 10 properties, or is it something even with one property, you should be on the lookout for things?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jen. And the answer is you should start before you even acquire a property, because if you own that property in your personal name and there's some incident that occurs, some injury that occurs on the property, you as the owner have unlimited personal liability. And if you think about what that means for a minute, it means you could literally lose everything potentially. There are no limits to the liability. And so that's why we create limited liability companies, because they insulate you from having any personal liability. And that way you are much more secure in knowing that any kind of risk is minimized and your personal assets are safe. And that's the key.
Yeah. And I think that's almost as I see a great way to get started is house hacking, so people buy it in their personal name and then rent out the other side. So I'm hearing that you should probably make sure you're setting yourself up a little bit for the unknown there.
Well, yeah. And, life is uncertain. We can't control what happens in the future. We certainly don't control what a renter is doing on our property. And so we need to make sure, otherwise you're putting your liability in the hands of somebody else. So you want to take control, make sure that you have a structure of some kind set up so that you have a separation between you and the business. And if something goes wrong with the business, well, you're still fine yourself, your family's protected. The business might not be doing too well, but at least you make sure that you are well protected and there won't be any adverse consequences for your family.
Well, and I know sometimes we think, well, Bob, I just have one property, right? It's not going to happen to me. It happens to other people, but it's not going to happen to me. I know the guy I'm renting to, or I know the couple that's renting it, or, whomever. So for somebody who thinks like that, is that you're setting yourself up for potential failure, or?
Yeah, you sure are. Those are kind of famous last words, Joe. It won't happen to me. Unfortunately, it's happened too many times to too many people. So yeah, even owning one rental property, why take the risk? Put it in a protective entity, typically an LLC. and you can sleep well at night knowing that you have no personal liability.
Well, so for the folks listening to this, Bob's talking about creating an entity, an LLC, it sounds like, right?
Mhm.
And with creating an entity, if something that entity owns, like a property, a house, and there's an incident there, it's going to really affect the business, but you yourself, it's going to make it that kind of barrier between you. And so
Yeah.
for some of you think that's not going to happen to me, it does. And it's happened to me and Jen. And we had somebody move into one of our properties, and Jen and I installed a new refrigerator right before the renter was moving in. Token of like, hey, welcome home, right? Brand new fridge, because the old one was working, but not as great. Well, a year and 9 months later, Bob, I got a knock on the door, and there was some guy outside the door. And he's like, are you Joe Delafave? I'm like, yep. He's like, well, you're being served. Sign here. I'm like, served? Like, what are you? I've never been served before, so this was kind of all new to me. But what happened was somebody tripped and fell in the driveway, delivering the refrigerator from the refrigerator company. And I didn't know that it even happened. All I knew, the refrigerator was in the house.
All right.
Mission accomplished. I didn't know this until a year and 9 months later when I got a letter from their attorney. And on that letter, it had me. It had all these LLCs named. Some had to do with the property, some didn't.
Mhm.
And it's a scary thing, guys. So when you think it doesn't happen, it can. And then the second time is when we had a fire at one of our properties.
Mhm.
Now, we didn't get a lawsuit from that because there was nobody home, and I can't say for sure, but I think the renters, whatever. But either way, you want to have that protection. And for the third one, some friends of ours, they bought a property in an Airbnb, but they put it in their own name. And there was an incident on the property where a family was taking a family photo on the deck, and the deck collapsed.
Oh boy. Yeah.
And people had to get airlifted to the hospital.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, well, did you have that property into an LLC or a trust? And like, no, we didn't. And I'm like, well, that's going to be some worrisome things right there, right? So whether it's zero, that's the time to start.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you're exactly right. And it's a very perceptive question, because that is the question. When do we start? I'm not making any money yet. I don't even own a property, but now I have to spend a little bit of money to set up these at least a protective entity. And it seems kind of backwards. You want to make money first and then be able to spend the money you're making. But really, you've got to make that expenditure first, get protected, and then know how to operate that LLC, know what to do with it. You'd be surprised about this, but clients you would think are pretty sophisticated will have an LLC set up, and then they forget to transfer the title into the LLC. So the title's still in their name. They've got an LLC. So, beyond just creating the LLC, we need to actually move the property into the LLC, file a new deed, and that way you're finally protected. So a lot of these things that we think are just second nature, of course, that'll never happen, or it's not going to happen to me. These things do happen. The last thing you want to do is be at the mercy of the court system, because you never know what's going to happen in court. You've got a version, they've got a version of what happened, and it's up to a bunch of people you don't know, they don't know you, and they're going to decide your fate. So it's just not worth taking the risk. You really want to make sure that you're in control instead of allowing a jury to be in control of your financial future.
Yeah, and I think, we heard it said before, success is a good night's sleep. So if you can lay your head down on the pillow and not be worried about all these things that, as an entrepreneur, they can wake you up at like 3 a.m. in the morning. Like, oh, did I do that yet?
Mhm.
So definitely be taking some notes if you're listening, or come back and listen if you're driving, and take some notes then. But what I hear you say too, so if you have bought a property in your own name, it is possible to then transfer it over to an LLC. If you're listening, you're like, oh, gee, like maybe I should probably get on that, which you should.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. And it is entirely possible to transfer the title over into the LLC. It's done all the time. We do it for clients on a regular basis. So that's the way. Those are the kind of the steps. Get the LLC set up, transfer the title into the LLC, sleep well at night. You're right, Jen.
So if you have one and you're thinking, oh boy, that sounds a lot like me, like So then I guess what's the very first step? We've identified there's a problem, right? So this next step, is it something I could go do on my own and go to like a legal Zoom or whatever that is and attempt to kind of do it my own, or is it best to work with somebody like you guys?
Well, if anybody ever goes to LegalZoom, you'll notice that on the side panel, they've got a bunch of attorneys that you can consult with. And the reason is that, quite frankly, going to LegalZoom alone or a service like LegalZoom just lets you push buttons and, yes, no, this, that. And you really don't know what the consequences of making those decisions are. And so an attorney can help with, now, do you want to do it this way or do it this way? Here's the consequence if you do it this way. Here's another consequence if you do it another way. And that way, you're much better informed and you're much more likely to get an LLC that's going to fit your particular situation. There's no such thing really as a generic LLC. They need to be very customized to you, your particular business. And here's an example. Somebody who's flipping properties will have a different type of LLC than someone who's acquiring buy and hold properties. So they're set up differently, they're taxed differently, they may be in different states. So there are many, many variables that you really need to have some good counsel on, and that's what attorneys can do and help you with.
Yeah, and I think like taking the pressure off yourself trying to figure it all out. Like let the professionals do their job so then you can do what you're good at, talking to sellers, writing up deals and, working on that next one that you're trying to acquire and be okay with asking for that help and paying for it and surrounding yourself with just an A+ team. Because I know that that's what our job always is who is the best CPA, who is the best attorney, like who knows their stuff, who's been in the field for a while, who can answer all these questions for us. I can't imagine trying to like learn it off of YouTube or something.
No, because it's kind of like you can believe everything on the internet, right? Uh-huh.
Well, this is one of the areas, if you're listening in, this is where you don't want to be a cheapskate. Okay. Save some money at Home Depot or something like that. But don't save money on this. If I could give you some of the best advice, we work very hard in spending time educating ourselves, doing the thing, going through all of the motions. You don't want to build an empire for nothing, right? So this is the one thing where one wrong signature, one wrong box checked can make the difference of it turning out okay or possibly not. And so having the proper people looking over your shoulder to make sure that you're doing it right is extremely important. And I can't go by that enough.
Well, you're exactly right, Joe. And, you mentioned signing. One signature can make a difference. Here's an example. When you are acquiring a property and you've got to sign a purchase and sale agreement, if you've done the right thing and you've already got your LLC set up, you want the buyer to be the LLC. So in other words, if I write my name as the buyer, Bob Bluhm, that makes me a party to the contract, which means that I've now opened myself to the possibility of a lawsuit for breach of contract because the other side of the contract thinks I didn't fulfill the contract according to their interpretation. So as long as your name is not on the contract, you're not a party to the contract, the LLC would be the party to the contract. And if they're going to sue, they have to sue the LLC and they leave you out of it. And again, you have no personal liability as a result. So very perceptive comment that you made, Joe. One signature can make all the difference.
And it really does. So my question, Bob, so we buy properties with terms like what Ron teaches and things like seller financing and wraps and things like that. So we have some holding LLCs that we have. We have others that we're doing fix and flips in. But however, there are times we come across some deals that we might wholesale to a cash buyer, right? Maybe we just have so many projects going on and we decide to wholesale one of them off to a cash buyer. Do I need an LLC to wholesale my very first deal? Or is it okay to just do that in my own name?
Well, once again, you always want to assess the risk. What is the risk? And in a wholesale deal, you're signing a contract as the initial buyer on the property, and then you want to turn around and sell the contract. So now you're a seller or an assignor. And, if you think you can, do the deal with no adverse consequences, then do the deal. But how could you be safer? Having an LLC set up to do wholesale deals. So now, once again, the LLC is the initial buyer. the LLC sells the contract to the end buyer, much, much safer, no risk of breach of contract claims.
That question was from one of our clients in our talk, and I was like, well, we're actually be talking about Bob next week about this. So I'll make sure I ask that question. So Lauren, if you're listening, that is for you. And Bob has spoken. I thought the same thing. You know, can you get away with one? The first one I did was 24 years ago. I was 22. I was broke. I had no money. I don't even think, honestly, Bob, I knew what an LLC was back then. I just found a deal because I got a Ron LeGrand VCR tape and did what it told me to do. But then after that, I was like, okay, I need to start. I'm going to grow more. I'm going to do more deals. I need to take this on a different level and get an LLC.
Mm-hmm.
But so I always advise the same thing. If you're going to do one or do 100, doesn't matter. If you're going to do a deal, it's best to do it inside of an LLC. Doesn't matter what kind of deal it is. There should be one for that.
That's right. And then, you know, that LLC for wholesaling is going to be a different kind of LLC, a different setup than it would be for, once again, buy and hold properties. So, you know, you're talking about Ron, and it's Ron LeGrand for your listeners, who is the grandfather of real estate education. He's a wonderful guy, incredibly knowledgeable. And Ron will have 4 different types of LLCs in his diagram. This LLC is for IRAs. In other words, this LLC would be a utility LLC. It's a management company or a beneficiary of a land trust. And, you know, there's a Pretty Houses LLC. And then there's a flipping or wholesaling LLC. So once again, wholesaling and flipping produces active income, earned income. That's going to be taxed differently than rental income, which is passive income. And we want to have a different type of LLC for each one of those.
So for some of our listeners listening, you're like, okay, like this is definitely what I need. And we're going to continue on. But Bob, if there was some way that somebody wanted to contact your office and say, hey, we need to sit down for a consultation. Are you taking on more clients right now?
Yes. Yeah. We have the capacity to do that. We're always expanding our team.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What's the best way for them to reach you?
They can call the office at 945-542-7738, or they can just go to info@assetdefenseteam.com, and there's a little thing you can fill out there, and we'll get in touch with you. Be happy to help.
Got it. And we'll make sure that is shown. So yeah, because we want to make sure we're going to dive into a few more things, but it's a great thing to get this done now. So then you don't have to worry about this. It's done. You could focus on doing one thing, and that's making deals and knowing that everything is set up the correct way from there.
And it's not to scare people, but you know, is there like a little bit behind the curtain you could share? Like what does that mean if they come after you personally? Like what could happen?
Well, what could happen is if they get a judgment against you personally, Jen, then they can literally take whatever you own. That could be your home in certain states, not Florida, thank goodness, not Texas, but most states, they could take your home. They could take your bank account, your stocks, bonds, mutual funds, investments of any kind. And if you own real estate in your personal name, they can take that too. So I mean, you could literally be bankrupted in that kind of a lawsuit. So why take that risk for the sake of saving a tiny little bit of money?
Yeah. And again, and not to scare people, it's really to educate, because like the more you know, I feel like the better qualified decisions that you can make. And if you're working really hard and like you said, building your empire, all it takes is one hiccup and you really could lose a lot. So I just want to preface that, just really make sure with the severity of this, like you want to make sure that you are protecting yourself and doing all the right motions.
Right.
And so also one of the things that we've learned from Ron that we also are really heavy into is doing a lot of our business into land trust too. Just to have that anonymity, just to be off the radar, to have your name. Is that something? Because I've heard some investors be like, you don't need land trust. They're a complete waste. And they don't know what they're talking about. Usually these people don't understand. And then some people are like, hey, you definitely want to do a land trust. So what is your take on land trusts? Land
trusts are wonderful tools, and especially in Florida. Some states are a little more hospitable to land trusts than others. And Florida is very, very hospitable to land trusts. Most other states are. They're legal in all 50 states, but the bottom line is a land trust does provide anonymity And in that sense, it can provide some degree of asset protection. Now, in and of itself, a trust does not protect you from lawsuits because most trusts are revocable, and revocable trusts simply don't protect. That is what a land trust is. But if you, the bottom line is this: why would you want anonymity? Well, because if you own 20, 30 properties, even 10 or 15 properties, or even 5 properties for that matter, anybody can find those properties that you own. It's all on public record with a county recorder. And in other words, they can plug in your name and up pops 5 properties that you own. You now look like a good target for a lawsuit because you've got assets. Plaintiff's attorneys are very smart, and most of them who succeed will actually do an asset search on a proposed target, someone they're thinking about suing, and they want to make sure that before they sue and expend their time and money and energy on this lawsuit, that there are actually going to be some assets there to take. So the whole point of anonymity is if they now do an asset search on you and you have land trusts where they're giving you anonymity, now it looks like you own no properties, and the plaintiff's lawyer may be dissuaded from suing you because there's not a clear set of assets to take if they win.
So somebody has a car accident or something happens and they look you up and like, well, geez, Bob's got 48 properties.
Mm-hmm.
I just need you to go to court and cry real, real good, and I'll do the rest, right? And
That's
I think
right.
we have a case. Or I look up and Bob doesn't own any, not even his lawnmower. Like Bob owns nothing, right? Well, then, geez, I don't know what we have here. That's probably a different conversation. Is that about right?
Very different conversation, because the plaintiff's lawyer is basically investing in the case. They're going to take 30, 40, or 50% of whatever they collect. And if it looks like there are no assets, 50% of zero is not real enticing for a plaintiff's lawyer to spend a lot of time working on that case. So, if you're able to make it look like, and this has happened with many, many clients, if you're able to make it look like you don't own anything, then the likelihood of your being sued drops pretty significantly.
So for all the people saying you don't need a land trust, you don't need it, but it's probably very beneficial, right?
Well, it's a great way to hold title to a property. First, a land trust, let me give you this. A land trust can save you a lot of money because there are no filing fees for a land trust. States usually charge a filing fee. There's no annual renewal fee. There's no tax return required for a land trust because, typically you're going to report any income on your personal return. And so it's a very inexpensive, there's no registered agent required for a land trust also. So it's a very inexpensive way to hold title to your property and get better protection.
Are they really expensive to form a land trust or really hard?
No, not at all. Not expensive. For a few $100s, anyone can form a land trust with, that's the fee that we charge. It's not a difficult thing to get set up. Doesn't take much time at all.
So a few $100. I've had clients before. When one of my friends did a deal in Detroit years back, and he's like, well, I talked to an attorney and they said to set up my land trust to take deed in the property, they were going to charge $10,000. That's
ridiculous.
I was like, settle down, buddy. You have the wrong attorney. Go find a different one. Yeah. And we ended up finding a different one for that deal.
Because it is true. Like some attorneys don't know about them or how to form them. And so there could be, so you just have to do some research and find those who are educated on it.
That's right. Yeah. We use land trusts regularly. Yep.
And in all 50 states, because I know when we did a deal in Pennsylvania and I talked to the attorney there for the first time, they're like, no, we don't do land trusts in PA. I'm like, oh yeah, you do. Because I just found a property that deeded to one. So I know that I didn't invent this in Pennsylvania, I promise you.
And they still messed it up because they put it as the seller's new address. So that's another story. But
they named it the wrong name, but either way, it still worked. They're just how we name them. So that's really, really important. So I'm glad we could top on that topic. But the next thing too, for some of us who maybe, even if you don't have kids, fine, but you want to do some estate planning. So I want to kind of dive into that. So like, what does that look like and why is that so important?
Sounds so scary.
Well, it does sound scary, but, because you think, you hear the word estate and you so automatically think, well, you got to be rich to have an estate. And the short answer is no, you don't. Your estate is whatever you own. And there are small estates, medium estates, and large estates. But for anybody, a living trust, which is an estate, part of it is an estate plan, can be a very valuable type of legal tool to have. The reason is that living trust will avoid probate. And probate is a process that occurs in a court. So you've got a lawyer, you've got a public record being created. It can take months and sometimes years to close probate, during which time the assets that you would be entitled to receive are not in your name. You don't have any legal right to do anything with those properties. And so a living trust allows you to acquire these properties as the trust, and you can get these assets within hours, days, as opposed to weeks, months, or years. So, and you avoid probate expenses, and you keep everything private at the same time. So there are many, many benefits of a living trust in and of itself. A broader estate plan does even more things. And one of those things is, you mentioned earlier, what if something happened to the two of us? What would happen to our kids? And you're able to establish guardianship and indicate who you want to raise your children if the unforeseen happens. If you don't designate who it will be, a court will decide that, and it could be exactly the wrong person you don't want raising your children. So that's just one of many, many things that an estate plan can do for you.
So if you are thinking of accumulating real estate, I will say this has been one of the things that I see quite a bit when I'm working with sellers. And sometimes a seller, they want to sell because they just inherited a property. And then they realize that they have to go through the probate process because the house was in mom's name or in dad's name and they passed away. And now you've got the 4 kids, 3 kids, whatever, how many children. And then now they have to go through this long drawn out process of, like you said, hiring attorneys, which in Florida, we have our attorney, Al Nicoletti, who's great for helping. But it's a process, guys. And I will tell you, if you are going to be building your own empire, and if something were to happen to any of you, you're going to want to make that process, because like, what happens to the kids? What happens to all these houses that you bought, right? And all the properties and all the things that you have and your retirement accounts and all the other things. So having that kind of protection there. So what does that process kind of look like if I want to get that started or getting that set up? Is it really long? Is it hard?
No, not long or hard. We start with a questionnaire to get some basic information, spelling of names, dates and ages of people, children's names. And then from that information, we're able to create a first draft of the trust, which we then send to you for review. And then we go over it in various appointments, usually never one, it's 2 or 3 appointments to get it down to exactly what you want, because these are all very customized. There's no like standard living trust. And just as an example, people may say, look, I have 3 kids and I don't want all my kids to get all this money or any money, for instance, when they're 25 years old, if I happen to die and the kids are 25. So can we stretch it out? And the short answer is, yeah, that's exactly what a trust can do. So we can say the children will receive at age 25, maybe 10%. At age 30, a little more. At age 35, even more. And then at age 40, when they can really appreciate money, they get the rest. And that's just one example, but it could be customized in many, many different ways. And so one guy that we did a trust for had a child who unfortunately was addicted to drugs. And he specified in his trust that his child would receive the properties under the trust only after he had been sober for a period of years. Because obviously he didn't want this money going to someone who's just going to, spend it on drugs. So it's a loving thing to do to help your children and to be able to, still provide that guidance and wisdom, even though you're not here. You do that through a trust.
Well, I learned something really huge from one of our mentors, and that was about when he was like, when I pass away and the kids get everything, that in order to get their check every year, they have to pass that drug test.
Yeah.
And if they don't pass, they've got 90 days to retake another one and pass. And if not, they could lose their whole trust.
Yeah.
So, like what you said, and I was thinking to myself at first, I'm like, really? And then if you think about it, if you give somebody who could potentially have a serious drug problem all of that money, it's like handing them a gun.
Yes, it is.
I'm like, wow, I never thought of that before,
Mhm.
right? You think the kids just get it all, but then you find out sometimes what's the adverse effect of that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And, we all know our children better than anybody else. And, some are mature and can handle money, others are not. And you want to be able to individualize this as opposed to, all the kids get all the money all at once. You can specify that this child gets this at this age, another child gets that at another age. Because what you're trying to do is protect your children and help them. And they may not see it as helping them by withholding some funds for a period of time, but in your wisdom that is better for the child.
Absolutely.
So have you had in your experiences had somewhere that wasn't spelled out correctly, like the estate planning, and it turns into a nightmare? Can you elaborate like what that looks like for some of us who maybe haven't gone through that or don't know enough about it?
Yeah, let me tell you about a situation that occurred to me. And that was my wife and I were newly married years ago, and her mother contracted terminal cancer and did not have long to live. But the doctors would come in and say, we could do this procedure and it could really extend her life. And so there was a division in the family. She didn't have any kind of medical directive, which is what you would sign as part of an estate plan that says, look, if I'm in a terminal condition, I want just to be kept comfortable and let me expire naturally, or, keep me alive forever on machines. And that was not done. And so it created some division within the family. Some people wanted to, do the procedure, keep her alive forever, not ready to let her go. Others said, no, that's not what mom would want. So we didn't know what mom would want because she didn't specify it. But that's exactly what you're able to do with an estate plan. You're able to say, this is what I want. And that ends the discussion.
Yeah. And honestly, it's like helping a really difficult situation, like make it a little easier on the family members, I feel like. Because that's so stressful. I would imagine.
And I could say I remember when my grandfather passed away. I mean, my grandfather passed away. My grandmother is on her own for the first time in her whole life. And she's, in her young 80s. And I've got my aunts, my uncles, and everybody, and they're all just, nobody knew what to do. And so do we sell this? Do we move grandma here? Do we do all these things? And my poor little grandmother, just lost her husband. They were been married for 55, 56 years. And now she's got all the kids fighting over this with no clear direction of what to do with it all. And it wasn't like they had a ton, but whatever you do have, that's all you got. Right. And so, this is where having that clarity of what is going to happen, because eventually it's going to happen to all of us. But when it does, you want to have a plan in place. So there's not that, because I'll tell you, that was super stressful, and family fighting and arguing, it causes nothing but heartache for a lot of folks. And, certain people aren't talking anymore.
And, we can avoid all that by having part of the estate plan as a durable power of attorney, which means that, your dad or grandfather may have designated you, let's say, who knows how to handle money, what you're doing, as the person who would take care of your grandmother's affairs. You would pay the bills. You would be able to, make sure she has enough money to live on, etc. And there's no room for argument at that point. You're the boss. You're in control. Mom or grandmother's given you that control over her finances. And at some age, that's a blessing that you don't have to worry about that anymore.
Right.
It's crazy to me, like none of this is taught anywhere unless you are tuning in, listening to something like this, and you start thinking ahead, because it's like nobody wants to talk about it. But yeah, you said it is inevitable, but there's really no place to just learn about it. And
right.
Yeah.
Well, and you're right, Jen. Nobody really wants to talk about it because, it's uncomfortable stuff that we don't want to really think about. We'd like to all think we're going to live forever. But let's put it in another way. How about not talking about us, but if we have parents who are still alive, maybe we need to help them get an estate plan set up so that you will benefit more from that. But you're absolutely right. It promotes family harmony. It minimizes, disagreements. Part of an estate plan too is where you can actually designate. I want this child to receive this item, maybe your wedding ring. I want this child to get the gun collection, so there's no fighting over who gets what.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's exactly also on my other grandfather. When he passed away, my step grandmother got all of the things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my grandfather had an amazing gun collection because that's what his one thing was. And when everybody was like, okay, like we're going to get grandpa's guns, my step grandma, whatever, but she was like, if you guys want them, go to auction and bid on them because that's where they're all going.
Wow.
And I will tell you the problems that caused, because when you're a little boy and you think your whole life you're going to inherit dad's gun, and now this is happening, it's my uncles and everybody, and now you're told this. I will tell you, it was very heartbreaking and very, very ugly. So I will tell you what we're talking about now. We love talking about deals and leads and making money and all that good stuff, but this stuff is equally as important.
But it's coming from all of that. The stuff you've acquired, the heart, or even the properties. Like, what if it's not just guns? What if it's like, I have 35 houses? Like, where do those go?
Yeah.
Yep.
So what do you guys do to keep up with all the current changes and laws and regulations? And you're also doing business in all of this different states. So like, is there something that you guys are doing to stay on top of all this? It's gotta be.
Yes. Yeah, we pay a lot of money for services that report to us new cases, that report to us changes in estate planning law, in asset protection law. So we're always reading, always staying up to date on what changes are.
Mhm.
Right.
Well, the big one this year, right? The Corporate Transparency Act.
Yes. Good, Jen.
Here we are. It's June, and where are we at with that, Bob?
Well, for those who don't know, the Corporate Transparency Act is a new law that became effective January 1st of this year, and it requires anybody with an existing entity to file a report with the federal government. And the report is going to require your information on your company. It will require information about you. You'll have to submit your driver's license and proof of identity. The whole idea is the government is trying to, I should say, very ineffectively trying to figure out who's a bad guy hiding behind an LLC, who's a drug dealer, a sex trafficker, or somebody with, raising money for terrorists. They want to know. And so we're required to file these reports. And if you had an entity before January 1st of this year, you have the rest of this year. As you say, Jen, it's June already. We have until December 31st to get that report in. If you've created an entity after January 1st, we only have 90 days in which to file that report. And then keep in mind, if something changes, we only have 30 days to report on the change. Now, someone may say, well, I don't want to do that. Well, the government imposes very significant fines and penalties, $500 a day for failing to report on time. And there's no cap on that. So it could end up being thousands of dollars. And if somebody willfully refuses to report or purposely provides false information, you can go to jail for 2 years. So it's a very serious kind of thing. And we're filing those reports for every new entity we create after January 1st of 2024. And we'll do them also for existing clients who have already created an entity prior to January 1st. So it's a serious law that needs to be complied with.
So $500 a day equals $15,000 a month for our listeners, which is, I mean, you take 1 year off, it's a $180,000 fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty significant. And that's each LLC. If you got a couple, that could get ugly quickly. So
you're right.
I would imagine you're going to want to file. So my question is, come the end of the year, do you think this is still going to be going on? Hasn't there been a lawsuit where they ruled it unconstitutional, but that was only for like one person or something?
It was a federal judge in Alabama who struck down it as unconstitutional, the Corporate Transparency Act, a reporting requirement. However, the government took the position, and the court, that it is unconstitutional only for the named defendants, or named plaintiffs, I should say, those who brought the suit. There were probably about 65,000 people, because it was a small business association that sued, and members of that association now don't have to file. But it's been appealed by the government, and nobody knows. But the bottom line is that everybody else who was not part of that lawsuit still has to file that report or risk those penalties.
So if you have an LLC that you opened up and you never used it, can you dissolve it? Or do you still have to go through this, providing all this documentation? Like, where, if you have a couple that you haven't used?
Mm-hmm. Well, there is an exemption for inactive LLCs or entities. This applies to corporations and limited partnerships as well. So any entity that's created with a Secretary of State is required to report, unless your entity has not received a certain amount of money in a period of time and you can demonstrate has not had any activity. So you're right, Jen. For inactive entities, there is no requirement to report.
Because I think we got that one in North Carolina.
I know I think we opened one in,
North Carolina, and we've never used it. And it was like 4 years ago we opened it, and it's probably should never even opened it. But now that we have it, it's like one of those things.
Oh man, I don't want to go pay for something I'm not using.
Right.
Yep.
So is there a charge for having to submit this paperwork? Is there any fees or costs for doing that? Or is that just like, hey, submit your stuff? And
if somebody wants to file their own report, there's no charge that the government imposes. Of course, when we're filing for someone, we have to cover our time. We're not trying to make a profit on it. We're just trying to cover our time and make sure we don't lose money for paying our staff to do the filing.
But you do that for your clients for a small charge?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yay. So you're going to see the importance of why we have this stuff and why it's so important, because it's about crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And that's why we hire only the best attorneys. And we've been following Bob for, like I said, quite a while. He's also part of the family mastermind. So you get to hang out, have dinner and things like that, and have these conversations. And that's when I knew we had him on. We had to have him here for you guys to be able to see this. So if you've got any questions, make sure you drop them down below. But Bob, this has been wonderful today. So once again, if somebody wants to know, how can they reach out to you in your offices? I know we dropped that number once again. I'm going to put it back on the screen, but maybe if you're driving, don't rewind this, but where's the best place to get a hold of you?
Well, you can call our office at 945-542-7738, or you can go to a website, which is info@assetdefenseteam.com, and we'll be glad to get back in touch with you. I'm happy to help.
Yay.
Yeah. So Jose, he was saying, or no, sorry, somebody just popped in here.
He said great content.
Oh, someone else said great content. Sorry about that. Okay. Jose lives in Illinois. Would you be able to help him?
Yes.
Okay. See, there you go. And then we had a Facebook comment come through. It's not coming in the chat, but Colleen's asking, am I able to take primary property out of my name and put it into a land trust? Because I know we talked about LLCs, but being able to put it into the land trust.
Yes, certainly. And when we say primary property, does that mean our personal residence?
That's what I would think. I'm not sure if that's what she meant. But
people do put their personal residence into a land trust. That's doable, certainly. It's not inadvisable. And certainly rental properties can go into a land trust as well.
And you can have like as many land trusts as you have properties.
Yes, that's right. And unlike LLCs, land trusts are very inexpensive because there's, once again, no filing fee, no annual renewal fee. You don't have to file a tax return. So there's no tax preparation expense, and you don't need a registered agent for a land trust. So they're very good. Now, when there is a land trust, though, there's always a beneficiary of every trust. And the beneficiary holds what's called the beneficial interest. And the problem is that is a personal property interest, not a real property interest. And if that individual who is the beneficiary gets sued for some reason, they can lose the beneficial interest, which is the right to receive income from the property and essentially control the property. So because of that, we want the beneficiary to be a limited liability company. And that's part of Ron's teaching as well. You always want to have an LLC as the beneficiary of the land trust. That way, if you get sued personally, you don't own the beneficial interest and it's protected by the LLC.
Mm-hmm.
Yay.
Might need to listen to that one a couple more times.
And so
Great breakdown, though.
now that I have the expert in the house, I have to ask the question as far as entity structure. So the way that I've learned, I think we've had this talk before, but our main LLC is in Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
So when I have a property that I own in Florida, my LLC in Wyoming now opens up a LLC in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And then I take deed to that property into a land trust. And my Florida LLC is the beneficiary of that trust.
That's right. Good job. Excellent, Joe. Perfect.
There we go.
That's right. Now, why would we set up a holding company in Wyoming? Well, Wyoming was the first state in 1977 to create an LLC. And most states try to model their LLC laws on Wyoming because they're always innovating in Wyoming, finding better and more ways to provide liability protection. So the holding company is, and this is something Ron will teach. A holding company is simply a company that owns other companies. So in other words, the Wyoming holding company owns the Florida LLC, which is the beneficiary of the land trust. And that can be done in any state. So once we have the holding LLC, which is set up in Wyoming because it's the strongest liability protection in the country, then we're able to add other LLCs in other states, like maybe your North Carolina LLC would be owned by the Wyoming holding company. And what that does is it provides stronger liability protection, especially when there's a possibility of piercing the corporate veil. If you're the member of the LLC and the corporate veil is pierced, they can actually get at your personal assets, which is what we're trying to avoid with an LLC in the first place. But now, when you're not the member of the LLC, rather the holding entity is the member of the LLC, even if they pierce the Florida LLC, now they would have to get through the Wyoming LLC, and that's harder to do because each state has its own piercing standards.
Boom.
Yeah.
If this is the 90 seconds of like absolute gold.
Protect yourself.
There was gold nuggets that Bob's been dropping all afternoon for some of you just listening. But that right there is how to protect your butt and to stay private and to protect yourself. And it doesn't matter if you've got one house, if you're wholesaling or wherever, this is it. And this is why, once again, thank you so much for Bob for coming on today.
I had a quick question. So are there like a certain number of properties you would put? So I know we can do as many land trusts. Each house has its own land trust, but is there like a safe number of properties to put into one LLC? Like,
well,
don't
it really
do more
depends.
than.
It really does depend. I would not suggest that you have to have one LLC per property. Not at all. I think that's overkill. But you do want to be able to have several properties. What several means really is going to depend on the individual. And the reason is, Joe, do we have just a few minutes that I can explain?
Yeah. We got plenty of time.
Okay. There's a big difference between an inside versus an outside lawsuit. So to explain, let's say you have several properties with equity of $500,000 in one LLC. You get into a car accident and it's your fault. They get a judgment against you. The properties in the LLC are completely protected from that lawsuit because the judgment was against you personally and you don't own the properties. That's called an outside lawsuit because the car accident occurred outside of the LLC. All right. An inside lawsuit is where the harm occurs inside the LLC. And that is where there's a fire, there's a slip and fall, there's an injury, the deck collapses, whatever it is. Now, the injured party can sue the owner of that property where the harm occurred, and that is the LLC, which is the owner of the property. Now, if they get a judgment, let's say for $1.2 million, all right, Well, you only have $500,000 worth of assets in that LLC, and they could take the 500,000 of assets. They could take all the properties in that LLC in an inside lawsuit. But here's the good news. They got a judgment for 1.2 million, so they didn't collect $700,000. Could they go after another one of your LLCs with other properties in it to get the 700,000? And the answer is no, because those LLCs are completely separate, and the assets in those LLCs had nothing to do with the harm in the first LLC, if that makes any sense. The other good news is that they cannot come after you personally for the extra 700,000 that they're not getting, because you have no personal liability. You are simply a member of the LLC, or better yet, your holding company in Wyoming is a member of that LLC. And so they're stuck. They got a $1.2 million judgment, but the only assets that they could get to satisfy the judgment are worth $500,000. That's the limit of what they're going to be able to get. And you're in better shape than you would have been. Now, nobody wants to lose $500,000 worth of properties. No. So what would you do? You could create a second LLC and put half of the properties in one, half of the properties in the other. And now you've minimized your risk to, let's say, $250,000. But, this is no different than buying a stock in some company and the company goes bankrupt and you've lost your investment. Right. You've always heard the statement, never invest money you can't afford to lose. So the same thing is happening here. We buy these properties, we put them in an LLC. We realize that in an outside lawsuit, they're completely protected. In an inside lawsuit, they may not be protected, but that's also why we have premises liability insurance to protect the properties. We want the plaintiff to take the insurance money, leave our properties alone. All right. So Jen, to answer your question, there's no specific answer. You need 3 properties, 5 properties, 10 properties. There's another way to think of it. If you have a $5 million net worth and you have $500,000 of equity in one LLC, well, maybe you're okay if you lost that because you have $5 million net worth. If you have a $500,000 net worth, and that's represented by all those properties, you probably want to divide them up into more than one LLC. Mm-hmm. So it depends on a lot of different factors: your age, the state in which you live, the likelihood of, who are you renting to? Low liability clients or high liability clients.
So what you're saying is if you have a lot of equity in the deals, you don't want to have 5 free and clear properties, maybe all in one. Separate those a little bit. But if you have some properties where you have some debt against it, loans and things like that, mm-hmm. you probably could lump a few more of those together because there's really not as much equity in that, mm-hmm. right?
That's correct. And then there are others who will advocate refi till you die. Mm-hmm. We've heard that phrase. And so you're stripping the equity out of the properties. So you've minimized your risk in that way. So if you had 5 paid off properties, you go to the bank, you get loans on those properties. Well, there's less equity now mm-hmm. for the plaintiff to take.
So then I guess here's a oddball question for you, very relevant to what we're talking about. So what if I had all these free and clear properties and I had $1 million worth of free and clear? Mm-hmm. Is there a way to have some other entity put a lien on those properties for, say, $1 million so then I don't have any equity?
Well, there is, but it's got to be real. It can't be fake. In other words, okay. There really has to be an exchange of value in some way. To set up something that's going to be a sham, it won't hold up in court. And there are some programs out there that, advocate for doing that. But once again, it's a smokescreen. And, if a plaintiff's lawyer does find you and they can see you've got some properties, but 80% of it's, been taken out, you only have 20% of the equity left. Maybe they'll decide it's not worth going after you, maybe, but you're not as juicy a target as you otherwise would be.
So the smokescreen stuff don't work. You can refi out of it or things like that.
And maybe just, don't put all your eggs in one basket and get another LLC or two.
Yeah, especially if they're big old eggs too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you explained that so well. Thank you. Because I feel like some of this stuff, especially when I was first getting into it, to make my head spin. But I feel like you just really broke it down so simple. Like, I hope everyone was taking notes. Again, re-listen to it if you need to. Maybe you don't have 5 properties yet. Maybe you're still working on your first one. So bookmark this to come back to it, because Bob just dropped so many special pieces of information that will really help you in your real estate journey.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Spot
We got another one. Another question, Kat. Oh, there you go. How can you protect your self-directed IRA from creditors if you take title to investment real estate in it?
That's a special kind of LLC. Once again, there are no generic LLCs, and that would be called an IRA LLC, in which the member of the LLC or the owner of the LLC is actually the IRA. So they're structured in a very specific way. That's not something because there are very specific rules that have to be followed in order for that to be valid and to be able to protect your IRA. Now, keep in mind that members of an LLC by law do not have any personal liability. So with your IRA as the owner of the LLC, it is the member and therefore cannot be attached.
Nice.
Perfect.
Yeah, great question, Kat.
Awesome.
All right. Any last minute questions? Feel free to drop them. Otherwise, we know Bob is a busy guy. He's over in Dallas helping out so many people across the country here, protecting assets. I know one thing we didn't really touch on, so maybe like one last thing was, protecting yourself against getting audited. I know I try to cross all my T's and dot all my I's. So is there any number one piece of advice as an investor, make sure you are doing this or not doing that?
Yes. Sole proprietors are audited at a 400% rate, higher rate than people with corporations or LLCs. By having the right kind of LLC, once again, an LLC, just here's one difference. An LLC can be taxed as an S corporation, as a C corporation, as a sole proprietorship, or as a partnership. Partnership LLCs are audited at the lowest rates. Single member LLCs or LLCs taxed as a sole proprietorship are audited at a much higher rate than other types of LLCs. So we do want to protect ourselves from an IRS audit. As Ron would say, that's one gal you don't want to dance with. And
Oh, Ron. He's probably right.
We all love Ron. We love
I
Ron.
do.
So you do need to, if you're concerned about audits at all, and all of us frankly should be, because you'd rather have root canals than go through an audit. But the bottom line is the type of entity you have, the way you're doing business, file your tax returns on a timely basis, and have a good tax preparer, a good accountant who will sign the return. That alone minimizes your risk of an audit. So there are things definitely that you can do. And one of the things we really like to do is educate our clients on these specific points that you're asking about, Jen. And so that's really what we do. We educate in addition to setting up the entities to protect people. We want them to know how to use these entities, what to do with them once you have them.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, I know. I just thought of it, popped in my head because it was something that people talk about, and there's all the fancy things on Instagram, like go get a car for a write-off, or put your kids to work. So there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of noise. So if you want the real deal, reach out to Bob and his team here, get the questions answered, and steer yourselves in the right direction.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's all the questions I have.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to ask, Bob?
Well, thank you so much, Bob, for once again for coming on. I'm sure we'll probably see you in a few months at the family.
Yep.
Yeah.
As usual, great. Thank you so much for having on, guys. If you're listening, I would definitely recommend doing this. It has been really eye-opening in a few of the small events that we've had, and we're not like these big, huge. I own 5,000 properties, right? So it doesn't matter if you're mom and pop just starting off, or if you do have a lot. You're definitely going to do this stuff because this is the most important part. So
Yeah, so reach out to Bob if you have any questions. Otherwise, guys, come back next week where we'll be live talking about real estate, how you don't have to go to banks, you don't have to use your own credit, but then also come back and listen to Bob because you need to protect all those assets. So have a great day, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks.